Iconoclasm was a violent and destructive movement from the 8th and 9th centuries in the Eastern Empire, started by Emperor Leo III, and thousands of Christians were tortured and suffered at the hands of iconoclasts. Many of them even died. And in this video, I'd like to give you some specific names and stories of saints and martyrs who were killed at the hands of iconoclasts. So iconoclasts destroyed religious images. And I think a lot of people know this, but they also persecuted defenders of images with torture and even death. Marilyn Stokestad writes, in 726, Emperor Leo III launched a campaign of iconoclasm, which means image breaking, decreeing that all religious images were idols and should be destroyed. In the decades that followed, iconoclasts undertook widespread destruction of devotional pictures of Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the saints. Those who defended devotional images, called iconodules, were persecuted. Okay, so this is a heretical, violent, persecuting movement. And their victims, the iconodules, the ones who defended the images, saw iconoclasts as both denying the incarnation and dishonoring Christ by dishonoring his images. So the iconoclasts actually based this destruction on a heretical view of Christ, saying that Christ can't be depicted even in his humanity. And the Christians at this time were saying, well, if Jesus is fully human, then he can be depicted as a human. So the human suffering caused by iconoclasm was immense, resulting in the imprisonment and torture of thousands of Christians, especially monks. J.J. Norwich writes, these conclusions, talking about the Synod of Hieraea, were all the emperor needed. His decrees were reaffirmed, the iconodules excommunicated, and the persecutions continued, especially of the monasteries. The unmentionables, as he called them. His most celebrated victim was Stephen, abbot of the monastery of St. Auxentius. Accused of every kind of vice, he was stoned to death in the street, but he was only one of several thousands of intractable monks and nuns who suffered ridicule, mutilation, or death in defense of the icons. So it's impossible to know all the names of all the Christians who were persecuted, tortured, killed, imprisoned, exiled from the iconoclasts, but we do know a few by name. So I'll give you a few of those names right now. So we know of Julian, Marcian, John, James, Alexis, Demetrius, Photius, Peter, Leontius, Mary, Gregory, and the others. So this was a group of Christians that were all persecuted around the same time, based on the same event. So they died in AD 730 in Constantinople. And this was at the very beginning of Emperor Leo's conquest against icons. He ordered an image of Jesus over the Chalky Gate to be torn down and destroyed. The Chalky Gate was a beautiful gate by the imperial palace in Constantinople, and there was an icon of Christ above this gate. And there's a reconstruction here in the picture. You can see it. Well, this destruction of this beautiful image of Jesus outraged a large number of people, including Julian, Marcian, John, and the others. And one of the defenders of the icon was Mary, and she actually pulled down the ladder of the guy who was crawling up it to tear down this icon. And there was this big uprising that happened when this image was trying to be torn down. So this whole group of people became imprisoned as a punishment, and a whole multitude of Christians, including this group, were kept in prison for 8 months, enduring beatings, after which the emperor ordered them to be burned with red-hot iron and beheaded, ultimately, okay? And Mary was not among the initial group that was in prison, but when she heard about this group of saints having their heads cut off, she offered herself up as a martyr, and Leo had her killed as well. So here's a whole group of Christians, and it's very noteworthy about them, by the way, that they're not priests, they're not monks. These are normal Christians who are defending the honor of Christ by defending the image of Christ over the Chalky Gate, and they were tortured and burned and beheaded over their defense of the honor of Christ. The next one is Hypatius, bishop of Ephesus, and Andrew the presbyter. They were killed in AD 730 as well, right at the beginning of that conquest against icons. Hypatius was a monk and a bishop, and he was friends with Andrew, who was a priest. And they were both imprisoned for a long time. And eventually the emperor ordered them to be tortured, and they were beaten, flayed, their hair was plucked, and their beards were tarred and set on fire. So they're being tortured for their defense of images of Christ and the saints. And the torturers put icons on their heads and set the icons on fire to burn them. And afterwards, they were dragged through the city and mocked by the people and ultimately beheaded and died as martyrs. And then their bodies were tossed to dogs to be eaten. So this just shows you some of the violence of this iconoclast movement and some of these saints by names, Hypatius and Andrew, who suffered and died because of the iconoclasts. The next one is Andrew of Crete. He died in 767, still within that first wave of iconoclasm. During the reign of Leo III's son, Constantine V, Andrew traveled to Constantinople and rebuked Constantine. So he was trying to, push back against what the emperor was doing. And he said, it would be better for you, O emperor, to attend to military matters and to govern the people than to persecute Christ and his servants. So he's just telling him, attend to the things of the emperor and don't persecute the church. Don't insert your views on ecclesiastical matters. But because of this rebuke, he was beaten, tortured, dragged through the streets, and one of the iconoclasts there struck him with an axe and he died. So he had a martyr's death defending the icons to the emperor himself. The next is Stephen the New, or Stephen the Younger, probably the most famous martyr for icons. He died in AD 767. He was a monk on Mount Auxentius near Constantinople. And Emperor Constantine V banished him to an island, and then later he was put on trial at Pharos Island. And it was at this trial that he accused the iconoclast as blaspheming Christ and the Mother of God for destroying their icon. So he's saying, if you hate the image of Christ so much that you want to destroy it, then you're dishonoring Christ by destroying it and dishonoring that image. And as proof of this argument, he took a golden coin inscribed with the image of the emperor, and he asked the judges there, he said, what would happen to a man if he threw the coin on the ground and then trampled the emperor's image under his feet? And the judges replied, they said, that man would be punished for dishonoring the image of the emperor. And then Stephen said, an even greater punishment awaits anyone who dishonors the image of the King of Heaven. Then he spat on a coin with the emperor's image, threw it on the ground, and trampled it underfoot. Okay, so after that, he was taken to Constantinople, chained, cast into prison for 11 months with 342 other monks who were also imprisoned and over icons. And the emperor ordered Stephen's execution. He was beaten, dragged through the streets, and stoned by supporters of the emperor. And one of those supporters struck Stephen in the head with a piece of wood and killed him. And his body was thrown into a pit like a criminal. So this is a really cool and ironic story, because it shows you that the emperor actually does understand that when you dishonor the image of the emperor, you dishonor the emperor himself. And so he proved this by dishonoring the emperor's image, and that made the judges mad. But they had no problem dishonoring the image of Christ. So he's calling them out on this hypocrisy that they're having, that they respect the image of the emperor, but they dishonor the king's image, who's the King of Heaven. The next one is Euthymius, Bishop of Sardis. He died in 840. So this was that second wave of iconoclasm. And he attended the Seventh Ecumenical Council in AD 783. And after that council, during the second wave, he was exiled for about 30 years under Emperor Nicephorus I, an iconodule, for the crime of tauntering a young woman who a senior official had intended to marry. So his first exile wasn't over icons. It was over, he made a young woman into a nun, but there was a politician who wanted to marry her. So he was exiled. However, he was restored by Leo V, who was an iconoclast emperor. And when Leo V realized, oh, he's a supporter of icons, then he was sent again into exile, into Ossia. And then later, the Emperor Michael II attempted to convince him to renounce his position on icons, but he failed. So he had Euthymius flogged and banished again to Crete. Then again, during the reign of Theophilus, the next emperor, he was stretched out on 4 poles, flogged with bullwhips, and a few days later he died from the wounds that he got from being tortured. So this poor saint, he was exiled, then brought back, then exiled again, then brought back and beaten, exiled again, and then eventually died from his wounds. But ultimately what killed him was the wounds that he endured for defending the icons. The next is Hilarion the New, abbot of Pelecete, and he died in AD 754. He was an abbot at the monastery of Pelecete during the reign of Leo V. And at a church service during Holy Week, a military commander forced his way into the monastery looking for iconodules. Okay, so he was actually at a church service, and imperial guards came in, soldiers, during the service and were looking for people who supported icons. And these soldiers were very disrespectful. They threw the communion from the church on the ground and arrested 42 monks, including Hilarion. The monks were then sent in chains to Edessa to be exiled. The remaining monks were beaten and endured having their beards burned, their faces smeared with tar, and their noses cut off. So they were mutilated and tortured. And then those monks who were sent into exile, they were all murdered and died as martyrs for the icons. The next is Theophylactus, Bishop of Nicomedia. He died in AD 845, again during that second wave. He was a friend of Saint Tarasios, who was actually the bishop over the Seventh Ecumenical Council. And during the reign of Leo V, he opposed the emperor's iconoclasm, and he actually prophesied the emperor's death. He wrote, "O emperor, great ruin will unexpectedly befall you, and you will find no one to deliver you from it." Okay, so he said that the emperor will suddenly be killed and nobody will be able to save him. And after that, he was deposed from being a bishop and sent into exile to the fortress Strobile in Asia Minor, where he spent 30 years enduring suffering and insults until his death. And that prophecy came true and was fulfilled. One day, a group of assassins came into the church where Leo V was at a service, and these assassins were dressed as choir members, and Leo was yelling for the guards, but the guards couldn't get in because the doors were barred, and then they ended up hacking Leo to pieces right there in front of the altar. So there it was, that sudden, unexpected death, and nobody was there to deliver him, just like Saint Theophylactus said. So these are some of the names. Of course, there are so many more saints who died. We don't know their names today. There were thousands who suffered. Many of them died for the defense of images of Jesus and the saints, including images of the Bible. And they were defending the Christology of the church, that Jesus really was a man, and they were defending the honor of Christ. That if you, just like that coin of the emperor, that if you spit on it and throw it on the ground, you dishonor the emperor. Well, taking an image of Christ and smashing it and dishonoring it is a dishonor to Christ himself. So iconoclasm was condemned by the church at the Seventh Ecumenical Council in AD 787, and finally was defeated by Saint Empress Regent Theodora at the Council of Constantinople in 843. So the iconoclasts did not have the last word on this issue, and eventually it was stomped out of the Eastern Empire. And these councils serve as protection for Christians who cherish sacred art, and most importantly, the gospel and the Christology that this art preserves and conveys. That the Word of God was truly made man and can be depicted as a man. That the gospel will be proclaimed not only in written words, but also through art. So this Christmas, you can set up your nativity scene. You put up pictures of the Bible in your home and pictures of Jesus in your home. You can watch your favorite Jesus movies and appreciate these things, because the iconoclasts did not win. In the end, martyrs always win. Christ will defeat the heretics. So thank you for watching. I hope you found it interesting. If you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, leave a comment below. I love hearing from you. And I'll see you next time.